The heavy oak doors of the Shilla Hotel's grand ballroom were the only thing separating Simone Brooks from her destiny. Outside, in the muffled foyer, she stood alone. She wore a cream-colored silk suit that cost more than the average Seoul apartment, tailored to look like armor. She touched the platinum pin in her silver-black hair, a small, vicious-looking shrike. 48 hours ago, I was in London, fixing Julian's mess in the Dubai derivatives market, she thought, the internal voice colder and sharper than the one she used for boardrooms. He was already taking credit for the save before the ink was dry. "Good girl, Sim," he'd said, patting my shoulder like a favored golden retriever. "Daddy would be proud you know your place." Her jaw tightened. Her place. For 30 years, her place was in the shadow of Brooks International, being the brain behind Julian's brawn. She was the architect of deals he couldn't understand, the cleaner of messes he was too arrogant to avoid. Her father had seen her brilliance only as a utility to prop up his golden son. They saw a fixer. They never thought to look for the usurper. She ran a thumb over the documents tucked inside her blazer pocket. The black swan clause. Old Chairman Park, Jaejoon's father, had recognized what her own family hadn't. He saw the rage underneath the polish. He hadn't just offered her a failsafe for his company. He had offered her a weapon against her own. "Julian thinks I'm here as his sleeper agent," she thought, a grim smile touching her lips. "He thinks I'm going to swallow Hansung whole and spit it into his trough. He has no idea that I'm not here to expand his empire. I'm here to build the army that's going to take it from him. They don't know what it's like to be the smartest person in a room for 30 years. 30 years. And have men who can barely read a balance sheet pat you on the head and tell you to fetch coffee." She wasn't walking down an aisle toward a husband. She was walking onto a battlefield. The man waiting at the altar. Chairman Jaejoon. He thinks this is the worst day of his life, Simone thought as she approached him, ignoring the murmurs of the vultures in the front row. He doesn't realize I'm the only lifeboat in the ocean. "It's time, Miss Brooks," an usher whispered, terrified to make eye contact. "It is," she replied, her voice like cracked ice. The air in the Shilla Hotel's grand ballroom was thick with the scent of 5,000 imported peonies and the metallic tang of impending disaster. Jaejoon adjusted his cufflinks, his face a mask of granite. To the 300 dignitaries in the pews, he was the chairman of Hansung Group, a titan of industry. To the men in the front row, his board of directors, he was a wounded stag. The morning's ticker tape had been a bloodbath. Short sellers were gutting Hansung's tech divisions, and the rumors of a hostile takeover by the Brooks International Group had moved from the dark web to the front page of the journal. He needed this marriage. The union with the Sohee heiress wasn't about love. It was a liquidity injection. It was a barricade. "The doors," his assistant whispered, checking his watch. "It's time." The heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral-style hall swung open. The string quartet transitioned into a haunting minor key arrangement of Wagner. The guests rose, a rustle of silk and hushed anticipation. But the figure framed in the light was not the petite, trembling girl Jaejoon had met at the engagement dinner. This woman was tall, her presence cutting through the room like a localized cold front. She didn't wear a traditional veil. She wore a cream-colored silk suit with a train that swept the floor like a regal cape. Her hair, a striking silver black, was pulled back into a sharp, lethal bun. She didn't walk. She marched, her heels striking the marble in a rhythmic, predatory cadence. The room went silent. This was not Sohee. Jaejoon's eyes narrowed. He recognized that gait. He'd seen it in televised segments from Davos and London. This was Simone Brooks, the vulture of Wall Street, the sister of his greatest enemy. She reached the altar, ignoring the gasps of the scandalized elders. She didn't take Jaejoon's hand. Instead, she handed her bouquet of dark calla lilies to a stunned flower girl and reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. You're in the wrong venue, Simone, Jaejoon said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she replied. Her voice was like aged scotch, smooth, smoky, and capable of burning. She didn't look at the officiant. She looked directly into Jaejoon's eyes. The Sohee family sold their debt to me at 4 a.m. this morning. The marriage contract was a transferable asset. I bought it. This is a farce, Jaejoon hissed, leaning in so the front row couldn't hear. I'll have you removed by security. You could, Simone said, pulling a single, red-stamped document from her pocket and unfolding it. But then you'd be trespassing on my property. She held the paper up between them. It was aged, the ink faded, but the signature at the bottom unmistakable. Jaejoon's father, the founding chairman. What is that? The black swan clause, she whispered. Jaejoon paced, his eyes fixed on the black swan document. My father was the most guarded man in Asia. He didn't even trust his own board with his medical records. Why would he hand the keys to his kingdom to the daughter of his greatest rival? Simone leaned back, the city lights flickering across her dark skin like a film reel. She took a slow sip of her drink, her gaze distant. They weren't friends, Jaejoon. They were predators who had been trying to kill each other for 40 years. But your father was a pragmatist. He saw what mine was too blind to see. And what was that? 1998. The Paris Energy Summit, Simone said, a faint, sharp smile touching her lips. I was standing in a room full of gray-haired men as my father's assistant. My brother Julian was supposed to deliver the closing argument for a $10 billion merger. He tripped over the numbers. He was losing the room. He was losing the future. She looked Jaejoon directly in the eye. I didn't ask for permission. I stepped up to the podium, pushed Julian aside, and recalculated the entire fiscal projection on the fly. I saved the deal in 12 minutes. My father didn't thank me. He was embarrassed that a woman had to save his son. But your father? Chairman Park Sr. was sitting in the back row. Jaejoon stopped pacing. He remembered that summit. His father had come back to Seoul silent and thoughtful. He approached me in the lobby afterward, Simone continued. He told me, a Brooks birthed you, but a Park would have known how to use you. He saw that I was the brain of the Brooks empire, while Julian was just the face. He knew that one day Julian would come for Hansung, and he knew that you, Jaejoon, for all your brilliant engineering, didn't have the stomach for the kind of bloodletting it takes to stop a man like my brother. So he bought your loyalty 10 years in advance, Jaejoon mused, a bitter realization dawning. He didn't buy me. He offered me a contingency, Simone corrected. He told me that if Hansung ever began to bleed, and if Julian was the one holding the knife, I was the only person smart enough to stop it. He gave me the capital to build my own private firm in exchange for this one fail-safe clause. He bet on my resentment, Jaejoon. He knew I'd rather rule Hansung with you than serve Julian at Brooks. Jaejoon looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the decades of being a secret weapon for a family that didn't deserve her. He didn't just hire a fixer, Jaejoon whispered. He poached a queen. And the queen is tired of playing for the wrong side, Simone replied. She stepped closer, her perfume, something sharp and expensive, filling his senses. I'm not here to be your wife, Chairman. I'm here to be your majority shareholder. As of 5 minutes ago, I control 51% of Hansung Group. The wedding is still happening, but the terms have changed. Jaejoon felt the world tilt. The vultures in the front row were leaning forward, sensing the kill. He looked at the woman standing where his submissive bride should have been. She wasn't an enemy to be defeated. She was a storm to be weathered. You expect me to say I do to a hostile takeover? Jaejoon asked, a grim, admiring smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite the ruin of his life's work. Simone Brooks leaned in, her lips brushing his ear as the cameras flashed, capturing the image of a devoted couple. "I expect you to survive," she whispered. "Now, give me the ring. We have a board meeting in an hour." The interior of the Maybach was a soundproof vault, insulated against the roar of the Seoul traffic and the frenzied shouting of the paparazzi outside. For 5 minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of Jaejoon's Patek Philippe and the rustle of Simone's silk suit as she crossed her legs. Jaejoon didn't look at her. He stared at the tinted window, his jaw set so tight it looked carved from basalt. "My legal team is already filing the injunction," he said, his voice cold and precise. "The black swan clause is a relic of a dead man's dementia. Fraud, coercion, take your pick. By tomorrow morning, this marriage will be a footnote in a legal textbook." Simone didn't flinch. She reached into the built-in minibar, poured 2 fingers of neat bourbon, and took a slow, methodical sip. "Your lawyers are excellent, Jaejoon. Truly. They'll keep this tied up in court for 3 years. But you don't have 3 years. You don't even have 3 days." She pulled a tablet from her slim briefcase and tapped the screen, sliding it across the leather seat toward him. "Look at the data," she commanded. "While we were exchanging vows, 3 of your board members, Park, Choi, and Young, were seen entering a private club with my brother's CFO. They aren't waiting for a court ruling. They're calling an emergency vote of no confidence for Friday morning. They'll argue that your instability led to this matrimonial disaster." Jaejoon finally turned, his eyes burning. "They wouldn't dare. I built their fortunes." "In business, gratitude is a liability," Simone countered smoothly. "Without the liquidity I brought into the marriage contract today, Hansung's credit rating drops to junk by sunset. The board will oust you, take the payout my brother is offering them, and watch you burn from the windows of your own penthouse." Jaejoon looked at the tablet. The numbers were undeniable. The hemorrhage was fatal. He was the king of a castle whose foundations had been turned into salt. "So what is this?" he asked, gesturing between them. "A slow execution? You marry me to watch me lose?" "I don't play for losses," Simone said, her gaze sharpening. "I spent a decade fixing the messes of men less capable than you. I'm tired of fixing things. I want to build something. My brother thinks I'm his sleeper agent, a way to swallow Hansung whole. He's wrong. I'm here because I want his seat, and I need your infrastructure to take it." She leaned forward, the scent of her perfume cutting through the tension. It was the scent of a predator, sophisticated and dangerous. "We strike a deal, a professional merger. You keep your title, your face on the building, and your legacy. I keep the controlling interest and the final word on all restructuring. To the world, we are a power couple, the ultimate strategic alliance. To the board, we are an unbreakable front." Jaejoon leaned back, his eyes searching hers. He looked for a tremor of doubt, a hint of a hidden agenda. He found only the same cold, calculating intellect that mirrored his own. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of something that wasn't exhaustion or anger. It was recognition. A fake marriage, Jaejoon mused, with a woman who just performed a daylight robbery on my life's work. "Not fake," Simone corrected, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Contractual. We don't need to share a bed, Jaejoon. We just need to share a target." The car pulled up to the Hansung headquarters. A sea of reporters waited behind velvet ropes. Jaejoon looked at her hand, the gold band he had been forced to place there an hour ago. "Friday," he said. "If we haven't neutralized the board by Friday, I'm firing my lawyers and hiring yours to sue you." Simone laughed, a short, sharp sound that was surprisingly melodic. She held out her hand, not for a kiss, but for a shake. "By Friday, they'll be begging us for their jobs." Jaejoon took her hand. Her grip was firm, dry, and steady. "The art of war, Simone." "No," she said, opening the car door as the flashes of 100 cameras exploded like white phosphorus. This is the Queen's Gambit. Your move, Chairman. The private terminal at Incheon International Airport didn't just welcome Jonathan Brooks. It seemed to bow under the weight of his ego. As the Gulf Stream stairs lowered, Jonathan stepped out, looking every bit the golden boy of global finance. But beneath the bespoke Italian wool and the disarming smile lay the soul of a piranha. He didn't come to Seoul for a wedding celebration. He came for a carcass. Standing on the tarmac, Jaejoon felt the subtle shift in Simone beside him. She didn't flinch. She was too disciplined for that. But her posture became a fraction more rigid, her chin tilting upward like a soldier bracing for a familiar bayonet. "Look at this," Jonathan called out, spreading his arms as he approached. "The happy couple. Sister, you look radiant. Marriage suits you, even if the groom looks like he's mourning a funeral." Jonathan didn't wait for an invitation. He pulled Simone into a hug that looked affectionate to the cameras, but felt like a restraint. He leaned into her ear, loud enough only for Jaejoon to hear. "The joke has gone on long enough, Sim. The papers are signed. Hand over the keys to Hansung and let's go home. I've already booked your flight to London." "I am home, Jonathan," Simone said, her voice a calm, rhythmic pulse. She disentangled herself with practiced grace. "And you're trespassing on a closed board session. We have work to do." An hour later, the viper's nest was fully assembled in the penthouse of the Shilla. Jonathan sat across from them, sipping a vintage tea as if he owned the air in the room. "Jaejoon, I'll be blunt," Jonathan said, setting the porcelain down with a soft clink. "My sister is a brilliant fixer. I sent her here to destabilize you so I could acquire you. I didn't expect her to actually wear the ring, but then again, Simone always was overcommitted to the bit. But let's be real. She's a Brooks. Blood is thicker than a marriage certificate signed in a panic." Jaejoon glanced at Simone. She was staring at a painting on the far wall, her expression unreadable. "Is that why you're here, Jonathan?" Jaejoon asked, his voice low. "To reclaim your property?" "I'm here because Simone is mine," Jonathan snapped, the mask of the golden boy slipping to reveal the bully beneath. "She's the architect of the Brooks fortune. Every deal I've closed, she prepped. Every rival I crushed, she scouted. She belongs in the Brooks war room, not playing house with a failing Korean tech giant." Simone stood up then. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, the Seoul skyline reflected in her eyes. "Do you remember the 2014 restructuring of the Berlin ports, Jonathan?" Jonathan frowned. "What does that have to do with—" "You told the board it was your strategy," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "But the night before the vote, when I told you the numbers didn't add up, you threw a crystal decanter at my head. You told me my job was to make you look like a god, not to think. I still have the scar on my hairline, the one the stylists have to hide every morning." Jaejoon felt a cold, sharp anger bloom in his chest. He looked at the faint, nearly invisible line near Simone's temple. 1998, Simone said, turning back to the room. "Jaejoon's father approached me. He knew you were coming for Hansung eventually. He offered me something you never could, Jonathan. He offered me a kingdom of my own. He offered me the Black Swan clause. Not as a trap for Jaejoon, but as an escape hatch for me." She walked over to Jaejoon and placed a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a claim. "I didn't choose Jaejoon because I was a fail-safe," she said, looking her brother dead in the eye. "I chose him because he's the only man I've met who is actually afraid of what I can do and respects me enough to let me do it anyway. I'm not going back to London, Jonathan. I'm staying here, and by the time I'm done, Brooks International won't be looking to acquire Hansung. It'll be lucky to survive it." Jonathan's face contorted, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the arms of his chair. He looked at Jaejoon, looking for a weakness. "You're trusting her?" Jonathan sneered. "She'll gut you the moment she doesn't need you." Jaejoon stood up, closing the distance between him and the man who had bruised the woman now standing at his side. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. She might, Jaejoon said quietly, but at least she'll do it as my equal. Get out of my hotel, Jonathan, before I decide that business is no longer the only way I want to settle this. As Jonathan stormed out, the silence in the room was heavy. Simone didn't move. Her hand was still on Jaejoon's chair, her fingers trembling just a fraction. Jaejoon reached up and covered her hand with his. The 2014 Berlin ports? I won that deal for him, she whispered. Then I look forward, Jaejoon said, to seeing what you do when you're winning for yourself. The grand ballroom of the Lotte World Tower was a cathedral of glass and ego. Tonight was the Blue Diamond Charity Gala, an event where the elite of Seoul gathered to donate millions while sharpening their knives for the next fiscal quarter. Jaejoon felt the weight of 1,000 stares. The news of his sudden marriage and the subsequent internal shakeup at Hansung had turned him into a curiosity, a wounded king being watched for the first stumble. Standing at the center of a circle of investors was Director Kwon, a man whose family had been a thorn in the side of Hansung for 2 generations. Kwon was loud, smelling of expensive cigars and the arrogance of someone who thought he'd already won. Chairman, Kwon called out, his voice booming over the string quartet. I must congratulate you. Most men buy a trophy wife to retire with. You bought a majority shareholder to report to. Tell me, do you have to ask for an allowance before you buy a drink, or does she just wire it to your valet? A ripple of cruel, muffled laughter moved through the circle. Jaejoon's jaw tightened, the muscle pulsing. He was a man of the old guard. In this culture, being publicly emasculated by a rival regarding his wife, especially a foreign one, was a social death sentence. Kwon, Jaejoon said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. I'd be careful. High altitudes tend to make men lightheaded. You might say something you'll regret when the market opens. Oh, the market? Kwon laughed, stepping closer, emboldened by the audience. My firm just secured the rights to the new Songdo development. While you've been busy playing I Do with the Brooks, I've been taking your future. You're not a titan anymore, Jaejoon. You're a legacy act. Kwon turned his back on Jaejoon, the ultimate insult, and raised his glass to the crowd. Jaejoon stood frozen, the heat of humiliation rising up his neck. He looked for a way to strike back, but in this room, words were useless without leverage. Then he felt a presence at his elbow. Simone was there. She didn't offer a sympathetic touch. She didn't whisper words of comfort or tell him it didn't matter. Instead, she stood shoulder to shoulder with him, looking out at the room with a terrifying, predatory calm. Don't look at him, she said softly, her eyes fixed on the chandelier's reflection. Look at the woman in the red dress by the bar, Mrs. Kwon. Simone, not now, Jaejoon hissed. Listen to me, she commanded. Her voice was a cold scalpel. Director Kwon thinks he secured the Songdo rights. What he doesn't know is that the lead architect is his wife's brother. And what he really doesn't know is that 3 hours ago, I bought the architect's gambling debts from a firm in Macau. $11 million worth. She slid a slim black smartphone into Jaejoon's hand. On the screen was a single PDF, a confession of kickbacks and shell company transfers, signed by the architect, dated this afternoon. He didn't just win the bid, Jaejoon. He rigged it. And I own the man who helped him do it. She finally looked at him, her eyes burning with a brilliant, dark intelligence. I don't need a husband who feels better, Jaejoon. I need a partner who knows when to pull the trigger. Go back over there and end him. I've already leaked the first page to the CISA Journal. He has exactly 60 seconds before his phone starts ringing. Jaejoon looked at the device, then at her. A slow, lethal smile spread across his face. He felt a rush of adrenaline that was better than any whiskey. He stepped back into the circle. Kwon! The director turned, annoyed. Still here, Jaejoon? I thought you'd be— Check your pocket, Jaejoon said. The timing was surgical. Kwan's phone buzzed, then his assistant's phone, then the phones of two other investors in the circle. The color drained from Kwan's face as he stared at the screen. The new Songdo headline was already trending, and it wasn't about a victory. It was about a fraud investigation. This is a fabrication, Kwan stammered, looking around wildly. It's a bankruptcy, Jaejoon corrected, stepping into Kwan's personal space, looming over him. I'll be buying your shares of the development for 10 cents on the dollar by midnight. My wife tells me we need the tax write-off. Jaejoon turned away, leaving Kwan standing in a vacuum of sudden social leprosy. He walked back to Simone, who was calmly taking a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. They walked toward the balcony, away from the buzzing hive of the elite. For a moment, they just stood in the cool night air, the city of Seoul glowing beneath them like a circuit board. You're a dangerous woman, Simone Brooks, Jaejoon said, his voice filled with a new, profound respect. And you're a quick study, Chairman, she replied, clinking her glass against his. In that moment, the fake marriage and the hostile takeover faded. They looked at the room they had just dismantled and realized the truth. They weren't just the most powerful people in the building. They were the only ones truly awake. The board meeting is on Friday, Jaejoon noted. Let them come, Simone said. They're bringing knives to a nuclear strike. The 52nd floor of the Hansung Tower was a glass island in a sea of midnight. Outside, Seoul was a blur of neon veins, but inside the air was heavy with the hum of servers and the frantic, silent dance of red numbers on the Bloomberg terminals. Hansung stock was under siege. A coordinated short attack from London. Jonathan's parting gift had dropped their value by 4% in 3 hours of aftermarket trading. Jaejoon sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, his tie discarded, the top 3 buttons of his shirt undone. He was staring at a map of global trade routes, his eyes bloodshot. Across from him, Simone was a study in controlled exhaustion. She had traded her silk blazer for a cashmere sweater, her feet tucked under her in the oversized leather chair. Her silver strand hair had finally begun to escape its pins, softening the sharp edges of her face. If we don't shore up the Singapore block by 4 a.m., the opening bell in New York will be the firing squad, Jaejoon said, his voice gravelly. I've already messaged my contacts in the sovereign wealth funds, Simone replied, not looking up from her laptop. But they're waiting to see if we blink. If we buy back too early, we look desperate. If we wait, we look weak. Jaejoon stood up, his joints popping. He walked over to the sideboard and pulled out a heavy crystal decanter filled with an amber liquid that looked like liquid gold. He poured 2 glasses, neat, and walked over to her. Break, he commanded softly. Simone blinked, her eyes finally leaving the screen. She looked at the glass, then up at him. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and the small point of contact felt like a static shock in the pressurized room. To the collapse, she joked darkly, raising the glass. To the rebuild, he corrected. The whiskey was old, peaty, and hit like a velvet hammer. Simone leaned back, letting her head rest against the top of the chair. For the first time since she had walked down the aisle, the fixer mask slipped. My father used to say that a man's worth is measured by what remains when his money is gone, Jaejoon said, leaning against the edge of the table near her. Tonight, I feel very light. At least you had a father who cared enough to leave a failsafe, Simone said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She stared into her glass. My father didn't see children. He saw portfolio assets. Jonathan was the blue chip stock. I was the high-yield bond, useful for a quick return, but ultimately disposable. Jaejoon watched her. He saw the way her shoulders dropped when she thought he wasn't looking. He realized then that they weren't just partners in a corporate war. They were both refugees from dynasties that had tried to consume them. "You aren't disposable, Simone," Jaejoon said. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second, before he gently tucked a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. He didn't pull his hand away. "You're the only person I've ever met who sees the world the way I do. Not as a series of wins, but as a series of survivals." Simone turned her face toward his hand, a ghost of a touch that felt more intimate than a kiss. "I've spent so many years being the smartest person in the room, Jaejoon. It's exhausting." "Then stop," he murmured. "With me, you don't have to be the smartest. You just have to be mine." The tension in the room shifted. It was no longer the electric charge of a board meeting or the friction of a hostile takeover. It was the gravity of two celestial bodies finally falling into the same orbit. Simone stood up, her movement slow and deliberate. She stood mere inches from him, the scent of the whiskey and her sharp perfume mixing in the still air. She looked at the man who had been her rival, her husband, and now her mirror. "If we lose tomorrow," she began. "We won't," Jaejoon interrupted, his hand moving from her hair to the nape of her neck. "But even if we do, the empire doesn't matter. I've spent my life building walls. I'd rather burn them all down if it meant you were standing in the ashes with me." Simone didn't answer with words. She reached up, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady, heavy thrum of his heart. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. In the silence of the 52nd floor, as the world outside prepared to tear them apart, they found the only thing more powerful than a majority stake, a reason to keep fighting. The red numbers on the screen continued to flicker, but for the first time in their lives, neither of them was looking at the price. The morning light in the penthouse was cold, filtered through a gray soul mist that made the city look like a charcoal sketch. The peace of the previous night was shattered by a single, encrypted file sitting on Simone's laptop. It was a data dump from an anonymous source calling themselves the Architect. It contained decades of offshore ledgers, environmental bypasses, and political donations, all signed by the late founding chairman, Jaejoon's father. If this went public, Hansung wouldn't just collapse. It would be dismantled by the state. Jaejoon's father's name, currently etched in granite on the city's skyline, would be dragged through the mud of a criminal trial. Simone stood in the kitchen, her knuckles white as she gripped a coffee mug. Her fixer instincts were screaming. Rule number 1 of her trade: a legacy is just a story told by the survivors. To save the company, she should bury the file, find the whistleblower, and neutralize them with a hefty payout or a threat of litigation. It was the clinical, cold-blooded move that had made her a legend in London. Jaejoon entered the kitchen, looking refreshed for the first time in weeks, unaware of the bomb sitting on the counter. "The Singapore block held," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "We're in the green, Simone." He stopped when he saw her face. The triumph died instantly. "What is it?" Simone turned the laptop toward him. As he scrolled, she watched the color drain from his face, replaced by a devastating, hollow realization. This wasn't just a corporate threat. It was a betrayal from beyond the grave. "He told me he did it for me," Jaejoon whispered, his voice cracking. "Every corner he cut, every law he bent. He said he was building a fortress for his son." "He was building a cage," Simone said, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Jaejoon, I can fix this. I have a team in Zurich. We can trace the leak, buy the silence, and scrub the servers. By Friday, this ghost will be gone. But we have to move now." Jaejoon looked up at her. He didn't look like a chairman. He looked like a man who had just found out his foundation was built on a graveyard. "And then what? We spend the rest of our lives paying for his sins? We become exactly what my father was?" Simone hesitated. The fixer rules were clear. You protect the asset at all costs. But she looked at Jaejoon. The man who, the night before, had said he'd rather burn the walls down than live without her. And she felt the rules crumbling. "If we don't fix it," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you lose everything. The title, the tower, the legacy." "The legacy is a lie, Simone," Jaejoon said, stepping toward her. He took her hands, his grip desperate. "I don't want to be a king of lies. I want to build something real with you, even if we have to start with nothing." Simone looked at the delete key on her laptop. She had spent 20 years protecting men like Jaejoon's father. She had made a fortune ensuring that the truth never saw the light of day. But for the first time, she wasn't looking at a client. She was looking at a man she respected, a man who was willing to lose his world to keep his soul. She reached out, but she didn't hit delete. Instead, she hit forward. "What are you doing?" Jaejoon asked. "I'm sending it to the Independent Ethics Committee," Simone said, her eyes flashing with a new, terrifying resolve. "But I'm sending it with a signed affidavit from us. We don't hide the ghost, Jaejoon. We exorcise it. We report the crimes, pay the fines, and we offer ourselves as the witnesses for the reform." "It's a suicide mission," Jaejoon breathed, though a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. "It's a gamble," Simone corrected, a sharp, brilliant smile returning to her lips. "The Queen's gambit. We lose the pawn of your father's legacy to win the endgame. We rebuild Hansung from the ground up. Clean, transparent, and ours." She stepped closer, her hand resting on the back of his neck. "Are you ready to be the man who burned his father's house down to build a palace?" Jaejoon pulled her into a fierce, sudden embrace. The fixer was gone. In her place stood a partner who had finally chosen a side. The rain in Seoul didn't fall. It descended like a heavy, gray curtain, drowning the neon glow of the Gangnam district. They were leaving a late-night strategy session at a private satellite office, a nondescript building chosen specifically because the Hansung Tower felt too much like a gilded cage. As they stepped onto the curb, waiting for the armored sedan, the world suddenly went silent in the way it does right before a catastrophe. The first shot didn't make a sound, suppressed and clinical, but it shattered the window of the shop behind Simone's head. "Get down!" Jaejoon's voice wasn't the measured baritone of a chairman. It was a raw, primal roar. He didn't think. He didn't calculate the risk to the company's image. He lunged, his heavy frame slamming into Simone, his momentum carrying them both behind the concrete pillar of an overpass. A second shot chipped the stone inches above his shoulder, spraying white dust into his dark hair. "Stay behind me," he hissed. His eyes, usually cool and analytical, were wide and dark with a terrifying, focused rage. "Jaejoon, you're bleeding!" Simone gasped, her voice shaking. A shard of glass had opened a jagged red line along his cheek. "It's not mine," he growled. He pulled a compact, blackened handgun from a concealed holster at the small of his back, a side of himself he had kept buried since his mandatory military service in a special operations unit decades ago. The assassin emerged from the shadows across the street, a professional in a rain-slicked tactical jacket. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone who thought he was hunting a suit-and-tie executive. He was wrong. Jaejoon didn't wait. He didn't issue a warning. He stepped out from the pillar, transitioning into a low, aggressive stance. He fired 3 times with surgical precision. The first 2 hits forced the assassin back. The third sent him sprawling into the gutter. But there was a second shooter. A black SUV accelerated toward them, a submachine gun appearing in the passenger window. "In the car! Now!" Jaejoon shoved Simone into the back of their idling sedan, diving in after her as a hail of lead chewed through the trunk. "Drive!" Jaejoon screamed at the security detail. As the car sped away, he didn't collapse in relief. He grabbed his encrypted phone, his voice a cold, vibrating edge of scorched earth fury. "This is Chairman Park," he said into the line. "Activate the Goliath protocol. I want the personal bank accounts of every board member frozen by dawn. I want their private residences under 24-hour surveillance. And find out which one of those cowards contacted the London hit pools. If they want blood in the water, tell them I'm the shark." He threw the phone down and turned to Simone. She was staring at him, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. He reached out, his large, rough hands cupping her face with a tenderness that contradicted the violence he had just unleashed. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice cracking with a sudden, desperate vulnerability. "Simone, look at me. Did they touch you?" "I'm fine," she whispered, her eyes searching his. "Jaejoon, you could have been killed. You stepped right into the line of fire." "I don't care about the line," he said, leaning in until their foreheads touched. His blood smeared against her skin, a grim mark of their new reality. "I told you. I'll burn it all down for you. That wasn't a corporate strategy, Simone. That was the truth." The car raced through the wet streets, a pressurized cabin of adrenaline and realization. The contract, the 51%, the fake alliance. It all felt like thin paper drifting away in a storm. In the dim light of the moving car, Simone reached up and gripped the front of his ruined silk shirt, pulling him toward her. The kiss was deep, tasting of rain, copper, and the terrifying, beautiful certainty that they had stopped pretending. They weren't just partners protecting an empire anymore. They were two people who had found the only thing worth dying for in a world of ghosts. "They think they made us weak by targeting us," Simone whispered against his lips, her fixer eyes returning, but this time backed by a lethal, personal fire. "They have no idea what we're going to do to them now." Jaejoon nodded, his jaw set. "Let's show them what a real takeover looks like." The headline on the Global Financial Times was a digital scream: "Brock's Park Union crumbles, Hansung in freefall." The strategy was a poison pill turned inside out. To catch a vulture, one must first present a convincing corpse. The public stage was the lobby of the Hansung International Plaza. Cameras swarmed like locusts as Simone emerged first, her face a mask of cold, aristocratic fury. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Behind her, Jaejoon followed, his expression one of suppressed rage, his suit slightly rumpled. The first time the public had seen the Iron Chairman look unraveled. "The merger was a mistake," Simone shouted over the din of reporters, her voice pitched perfectly for the evening news. "Mr. Park's personal liabilities have made Hansung an untenable partner. I am moving to liquidate my 51% stake effective immediately." Jaejoon grabbed her arm, a gesture that looked violent to the lenses but felt like a supportive squeeze to her. "You're gutting the company out of spite, Simone. I won't let you do this." "You can't stop me," she spat, wrenching her arm away. "Watch the ticker, Jaejoon. By noon, I'll be back in London, and you'll be the king of a graveyard." She climbed into a waiting black car, not his, and sped away. Within minutes, a massive block of Hansung shares hit the open market. It was a bloodbath. The stock price didn't just dip, it cratered, shedding 15% of its value in 30 minutes. In the war room, a dark, secure suite in an unrelated boutique hotel, Jaejoon and Simone stood side by side, watching the monitors. The room was silent except for the frantic clicking of 3 elite traders they had hired personally, men who existed outside the Hansung payroll. "There they are," Simone whispered, pointing to the screen. On the level 2 market data, several shell companies, entities they had traced back to Director Park, Director Young, and Jonathan Brooks, began to buy. They were pouncing on the cheap stock, thinking they were finally seizing the majority control they had craved. They were using their personal leverage, even taking out massive margin loans to buy every falling share Simone sold. They're over-leveraging, Jaejoon noted, his eyes tracking the volume. Kwan just put up his family's real estate holdings as collateral to buy another 2%. He thinks he's buying my chair. He's buying a debt bomb, Simone said. Her sell-off wasn't actually a sell-off of her 51% majority. Through a complex series of dark pool trades and synthetic shorts, she was selling borrowed shares she and Jaejoon actually controlled through a secondary holding company they'd set up. The trap is set, the lead trader announced. They've bought nearly 20 million shares at the bottom. They think they own the room. Jaejoon checked his watch. Wait for it. Let them feel the victory. Let them call the emergency board meeting to oust me. The phone on the table buzzed. It was a notification for an emergency meeting at 4 p.m. The subject, removal of Chairman Park and appointment of new leadership. Jaejoon looked at Simone. The adrenaline of the play was humming between them, a shared secret that felt more intimate than the kiss in the rain. They think they're the hunters, Jaejoon said, straightening his tie and reclaiming the chairman persona, though this time it was backed by a lethal smirk. They don't realize that we just sold them the rope they're going to hang themselves with. Simone picked up her coat, the cream-colored silk suit she had worn on their wedding day. Shall we go to the meeting, darling? I believe we have a closing statement to make. After you, Madame Majority, Jaejoon replied. The vultures were circling, but as they entered the Hansung boardroom, the corpse was about to stand up and lock the doors. The Hansung boardroom was a temple of cold glass and colder hearts. Director Kwon sat at the head of the table, his fingers tapping a rhythmic, arrogant beat on the polished mahogany. Jonathan Brooks leaned against the back wall, his smile that of a man who had finally reclaimed his favorite toy. Jaejoon, Simone, Kwon said, gesturing to the 2 empty seats at the foot of the table. Thank you for coming. We wanted you here to witness the tally. As of 3:45 p.m., the consortium led by myself and Brooks International holds 62% of the voting shares. The motion to remove you is a mere formality. Jaejoon didn't sit. He stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the men he had known for decades. You bought those shares on margin, Kwon. You risked your family's legacy on the assumption that the floor was solid. The floor is solid, Jonathan interjected, his voice dripping with condescension. Simone sold, we bought. It's the oldest play in the book, sister. You got emotional, you panicked, and you lost. Simone stepped forward, her heels clicking like the cocking of a hammer. She didn't look like a woman who had lost. She looked like a woman who was about to perform surgery without anesthesia. I didn't panic, Jonathan, she said, pulling a remote from her pocket and activating the massive wall-mounted monitors. I created a vacuum. The screen flickered to life, showing the global ticker. But it wasn't just Hansung. It showed the 3 parent conglomerates that Kwon, Jung, and Choi controlled. While you were busy buying my dumped Hansung stock, Simone explained, her voice gaining a lethal edge, you depleted your cash reserves and leveraged your own companies as collateral. You left your own borders completely undefended. 10 minutes ago, Jaejoon picked up, his voice booming with the authority of a general, a shell company named Aegis, funded by the private liquidity, Simone and I moved offshore last week, began a coordinated strike on your stocks. We aren't just shorting you. We are buying the debt your banks are currently calling in because of your over-leverage. The color drained from Kwon's face as his phone began to vibrate violently on the table. Then Young's, then Choi's. What is this? Kwon stammered, staring at the screen. His company's stock was plummeting in a vertical line. This is market manipulation. No, Simone said, leaning over the table, her face inches from his. This is a margin call. And since you used your personal holdings to buy Hansung today, you have no liquidity left to cover it. By the time the closing bell rings in 15 minutes, you won't just be out of the board. You'll be out of your houses. The boardroom transformed into a scene of panicked carnage. Directors were screaming into phones, demanding their brokers sell, but there were no buyers, except for Jaejoon. He was sitting now, calmly watching the screen as the three conglomerates, empires that had stood for half a century, were being swallowed whole by the very man they had tried to execute. Jonathan Brooks watched in horror as his own family subsidiary in Seoul began to flash red. "Simone, stop this. You're destroying the Brooks name." "I'm not destroying it, Jonathan," she said, not even turning to look at him. "I'm acquiring it. I told you I wanted your seat. I just didn't tell you I was going to take the whole floor." The clock hit 4 p.m. The bell rang. The silence that followed was deafening. Jaejoon stood up and walked to the head of the table. He didn't ask Kwon to move. He simply waited until the broken man gathered his trembling hands and stood up. Jaejoon took his seat. "The meeting is adjourned," Jaejoon said. "The new board will consist of myself, Simone Brooks, and the trustees of our new holding firm, Apex. For those of you who still have shirts on your backs, I suggest you use them to wipe the sweat off your faces on the way out." As the room cleared of the broken vultures, Simone walked to the window. Jaejoon joined her, looking out at the city. They weren't just the survivors of a coup anymore. They had conquered the market in a single surgical afternoon. "We just took 3 of the largest firms in the country," Jaejoon mused, his hand finding hers. "What do we do now?" Simone turned to him, her eyes bright with a fire that had nothing to do with money. Now we build the empire your father was too afraid to dream of." The victory tasted like ash before the first celebratory toast could be poured. Jonathan Brooks didn't leave the building with the other broken directors. He waited in the private lounge, leaning against the cold marble wall, his designer suit rumpled, but his eyes burning with a desperate scorched earth malice. He was a man who had lost his fortune, which made him the most dangerous thing in the world. A man with nothing left to protect. Jaejoon and Simone walked out of the boardroom, their hands still intertwined, the electricity of their conquest still humming between them. "I expected you to be halfway to the airport, Jonathan," Jaejoon said, his voice flat. "Security is on their way up to escort the former shareholders out." "Former? Right." Jonathan let out a jagged, hollow laugh. He looked at Simone, then at Jaejoon. "You think you've won a kingdom, Jaejoon? You think you found a soulmate in the woman who just helped you dismantle your rivals? You always were the sentimental one. My father saw it, and your father knew it." Simone's grip on Jaejoon's hand tightened. "Go home, Jonathan. It's over." "It hasn't even started," Jonathan hissed. He pulled a weathered, hand-delivered envelope from his inner pocket. Not a corporate document, but a personal one, bearing the heavy wax seal of the late founding chairman Park. "You think our father and yours made a fail-safe deal? You think Simone was sent here to save you?" He tossed the envelope onto a side table. It skidded across the glass and stopped at Jaejoon's feet. "Rid the codicil, Jaejoon, the one my father kept in the London vaults. Your father didn't just hire a fixer, he hired an executioner." Jaejoon picked up the paper. His hands, which had been steady through the most volatile trading session in history, began to tremble. Simone watched him, her breath hitching. She had seen the contracts, but she hadn't seen this. "To my daughter, Simone," the letter began, but the signature at the bottom was not her father's. It was Jaejoon's. "If my son proves to be soft, if he values his pride over the profit, or if he cannot hold the line against the wolves, you are not to save him. You are to liquidate him. Break the Hansung Group into pieces and absorb them into Brooks International. I would rather see my empire eaten by a worthy predator than see it bleed out under a weak heir." The room went deathly silent. "He didn't want a fail-safe," Jaejoon whispered, the words catching in his throat. "He wanted a test, and I was the subject." He looked at Simone, his eyes filled with a sudden agonizing distance. "You knew. When you walked down that aisle, you weren't there to be my partner. You were there to be my ending. Jaejoon, no, Simone said, her voice cracking. She stepped toward him, but he instinctively stepped back. I knew there were liquidation clauses. Yes, I knew the deal was aggressive, but I didn't know he wanted me to destroy you. But you would have, Jonathan shouted, a triumphant sneer returning to his face. That's what you do, Sim. You're the vulture. You don't build things. You pick the bones clean. You only stayed because the profit became personal. But don't lie to him. If he hadn't played your game, if he hadn't been strong enough to keep up with you, you would have gutted him by now. Simone looked at Jaejoon, her face pale. She couldn't deny it. She had arrived in Seoul with a heart of ice and a suitcase full of exit strategies. The person she was 6 months ago would have watched him fail without a second thought. Is it true? Jaejoon asked, his voice low, a terrifying calm replacing his anger. If I hadn't met your standards, would you have executed the liquidation? Simone looked at the man she had learned to love, the only man who had ever truly seen her. She could lie. She could say she loved him from the moment the doors opened, but they were mirrors, and mirrors don't hide the truth. Yes, she whispered, the word sounding like a gunshot. In the beginning, that was the job. Jaejoon looked at her for a long, soul-crushing moment. He didn't yell. He didn't throw her out. He simply set the letter down on the table, turned his back on both of them, and walked back into the darkened boardroom. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Simone standing in the hallway with her brother. There, Jonathan whispered, straightening his tie. Now we're both alone. Happy wedding anniversary, sister. The silence in the Hansung boardroom was no longer the silence of a sanctuary. It was the silence of a mausoleum. Jaejoon sat at the head of the table, the seat he had won back only hours ago. The city lights of Seoul bled through the floor-to-ceiling glass, casting long, cold shadows across the mahogany. He didn't look like a conqueror. He looked like a man sitting in a glass house, waiting for the first stone to be thrown. The heavy double doors creaked open. Simone didn't march in this time. Her footsteps were hesitant, muffled by the thick carpet. She had changed out of her suit into a simple black dress, stripped of her corporate armor. You stayed, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Where else would I go? Jaejoon didn't look up from the letter, the executioner's codicil, lying on the table. Everything I am is tied to this building, and everything this building is a lie, constructed by a man who didn't think I was enough. He was wrong, Jaejoon. Was he? Jaejoon finally looked at her, his eyes hard and glassy. He hired you because he knew I'd fall for you. He used my own humanity as a lure for a predator, and you played the part perfectly. Simone walked to the opposite end of the long table, the literal and metaphorical distance between them feeling like an ocean. I didn't play a part. I followed a contract. That's what I was. Jaejoon. A series of clauses and contingencies. My father, your father, they raised us to be machines. They stripped us of everything that wasn't strength until we were nothing but polished steel. She leaned her hands on the table, her reflection staring back at her from the dark wood. When I walked into that venue, I saw a target. I saw a man I was going to dismantle to prove I was better than my brother. But then you looked at me, not like a rival, not like a prize. You looked at me like I was the answer to a question you'd been asking your whole life. And what did you see? Jaejoon asked, his voice cracking. I saw myself, she said, a single tear tracing a path through her perfect makeup. I saw someone who was just as lonely, just as tired, and just as capable of burning the world down to feel a spark of warmth. I didn't stop the liquidation because you were strong enough for the firm. I stopped it because you were too important to me. Jaejoon stood up, but he didn't move toward her. He paced the length of the glass wall. We built this new empire on a foundation of betrayal, Simone. Every time I look at you, I'll wonder if you're calculating my value. Every time you look at me, you'll wonder if I'm waiting for the next knife to drop. Maybe, she admitted, her voice steadying. Maybe trust is a luxury people like us don't get to have. Maybe we're just two damaged people who found a way to be dangerous together. She walked toward him, stopping just outside his reach. The tension between them was no longer the sharp thrill of the hunt. It was a heavy, aching gravity. But look at the alternative, Jaejoon, she whispered. Go back to that empty penthouse. Go back to a board of directors who fear you but don't know you. Go back to being the iron chairman, with no one to tell you when you're wrong. Can you do it? Can you go back to being alone? Jaejoon stopped. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the scars she'd mentioned, the weariness in her eyes that matched his own, and the brilliance that still burned there. He realized that the world outside this room was cold, populated by people who wanted things from him, but never for him, except for the woman standing in front of him. No, he said, the word a confession. I can't. He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched her cheek. Simone closed her eyes, leaning into his palm. There was no fire, no dramatic kiss, no grand apology. There was only the quiet, terrifying realization that they were trapped, not by a contract or a father's ghost, but by each other. We are a disaster, he murmured, pulling her gently into his arms. We are an empire, she corrected, resting her head against his chest, listening to the heart that beat only for her. And if the house is made of glass, then we'll just have to make sure no one survives long enough to throw a stone. In the dark boardroom, high above the city, the two most powerful people held onto each other like survivors of a shipwreck, knowing that the only thing worse than the war they were in was the silence of a world without the other. The sun rose over Seoul, not as a herald of a new day, but as a witness to a new era. The morning headlines didn't mention the Black Swan clause or the Brooks family civil war. Instead, they carried a single minimalist logo, a stylized phoenix rising from a golden circle. The company was simply called Aurelius. It was the merger of Jaejoon's Hansung legacy and Simone's private equity holdings, a transcontinental titan that held the keys to everything from green energy in the Baltic to the next generation of semiconductors in Gyeonggi. In the center of the Aurelius lobby, the statue of Jaejoon's father had been removed. In its place stood a vast open space of white marble and light. Jaejoon stood in his new office, the air smelling of fresh cedar and the crisp ozone scent of a high-altitude ventilation system. He was signing the final document, the one that legally bound his and Simone's personal fates together. It wasn't a marriage certificate, though their ring still caught the light. It was a mutual absolute trust, a legal document that ensured that if one fell, the other became the soul of the company. It's done, Simone said, stepping into the room. She looked different. The fixer was gone, replaced by a woman who had traded her defensive suits for a charcoal gray dress that moved with the grace of a shadow. The London exchanges just processed the transfer. Brooks International is officially a subsidiary of Aurelius. Jonathan has been settled in a quiet estate in the Highlands. Very luxurious, very far from a keyboard. Jaejoon looked up, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. And the board? There is no board, Jaejoon, she reminded him, walking behind his chair and resting her hands on his shoulders. There is only us. The directors we've appointed are analysts, not vipers. They report to the vision, not the ego. Jaejoon leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief second. For the first time in his life, the weight on his chest wasn't a burden. It was a foundation. He reached up, covering her hands with his. We're no longer saving an empire, are we? No, Simone whispered, her lips brushing his hair. We're building a world where we don't have to look over our shoulders. The door to the private helipad opened, letting in the roar of the wind and the distant rhythmic thrum of a helicopter's rotors. They walked out together, stepping into the biting, clean air of the 100th floor. From this height, the city of Seoul looked like a circuit board, a million lives blinking in the haze. Beyond the horizon lay Tokyo, London, and New York, all cities that now answered to the name Aurelius. They reached the edge of the helipad, the wind whipping Simone's hair into a silver halo. The world was spread out at their feet, vast and chaotic. The vultures were still out there, new rivals, new ghosts, new wars. But they felt small from this altitude. Jaejoon turned to her, his hand sliding into hers, their fingers interlocking with a grip that no contract could ever replicate. He didn't see a business partner or a shareholder. He saw the only person who had ever made the silence of the top floor feel like home. "Are you ready?" he asked, the wind catching his words. Simone looked out at the horizon, her eyes clear and terrifyingly bright. She wasn't afraid of the fall anymore. She had already survived the crash. "I've been ready for 55 years, Jaejoon," she replied. The helicopter lifted off, banking sharply toward the rising sun. Below them, the world continued its frantic, greedy struggle, but up here, in the thin, cold air of the absolute peak, there was only a profound and crystalline peace. They were still in the middle of a war. They would always be in the middle of a war. But for the first time in their lives, they weren't fighting for a seat at the table. They were the table. The Swiss Alps were silent, save for the rhythmic crunch of snow beneath boots and the distant, lonely whistle of the wind. 1 year after the founding of Aurelius, the world expected Jaejoon and Simone to be in a command center in New York or a gala in Singapore. Instead, they were in a secluded villa overlooking Lake Geneva, the only place on Earth where the Aurelius ticker didn't flicker on the walls. Jaejoon stood on the terrace, holding 2 glasses of a vintage red that cost more than most people's cars. He watched Simone. She was sitting by the outdoor fire pit, a tablet discarded on the stone bench beside her. She wasn't looking at the markets. She was watching a hawk circle the valley below. He walked over and handed her a glass. "The French Ministry of Finance is calling," he said, his voice quiet. "They want to discuss the new fusion grid in Lyon." Simone took the glass, her fingers lingering against his. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them the chairman was currently unavailable," Jaejoon said, sitting beside her, "and that the CEO was occupied with a more pressing matter." Simone smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes and softened the sharp, regal lines of her face. "The hawk?" "The peace," he corrected. They sat in silence for a long time. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that had to be earned through blood and boardroom coups. A year ago, this kind of stillness would have terrified them. It would have felt like a vacuum waiting to be filled by an enemy. Now it felt like a victory. "Jonathan sent a letter," Simone said, staring into the flames. "He started a vineyard in Scotland. He says he hates it. He says the soil is stubborn and the weather is miserable." "Sounds like he's finally found something he can't bully into submission," Jaejoon noted. "He asked for an invitation to the anniversary gala." Jaejoon took a slow sip of his wine. "And?" "I told him we aren't having one," she said. "I told him we've spent enough of our lives being a spectacle for other people. This year, the anniversary is just for the shareholders." "The shareholders?" Jaejoon raised an eyebrow. Simone leaned her head on his shoulder, the weight of her trust a solid, physical thing. "The only 2 people who own the company, Jaejoon. You and me." Jaejoon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at the woman who had arrived in his life as a hostile takeover and stayed as his salvation. "The first rings were part of a contract," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. "They were symbols of a failsafe, a trap, a gamble." He opened the box. Inside were 2 bands of hammered platinum, simple and unadorned, forged from a single piece of metal. "These," he said, are for the world we built together. No clauses, no exit strategies, just us. Simone looked at the rings, then up at him. The vulture of Wall Street felt a lump in her throat that no billion-dollar deal could ever cause. She took her hand out of his and slid the old corporate gold band off her finger, letting it drop onto the stone table with a hollow clink. She held her hand out to him. Then make it official, Chairman, for the last time. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting the world into a deep, regal purple, Jaejoon slid the new ring onto her finger. The war wasn't over. It would never be over. Somewhere, a rival was plotting, a market was shifting, and a ghost was whispering. But as they sat together in the cold mountain air, watching the fire burn, they knew the secret that their fathers never understood. Power isn't about how much you can take. It's about having the one person you'd give it all up for sitting right beside you. The lights of the villa flickered on, a warm amber glow against the encroaching dark. Inside, the world was waiting. But for now, they stayed in the silence, two monarchs who had finally found their home. The end. Thank you for watching. If you love this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional twists and character-driven plots. And if you're ready for the next story, make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep believing in love that defies all odds.